Hey y'all, tonight we're diving deep beneath the waves to explore one of history's most captivating mysteries, the lost civilization of Atlantis. You can almost feel the cool ocean currents swirling around ancient marble columns as they catch the last rays of sunlight filtering down through crystal clear waters. Somewhere in the depths, coral has claimed towering spires that once scraped the sky, and schools of fish dart through what were once grand boulevards where philosophers debated the nature of existence. You probably won't survive the intellectual whirlpool we're about to plunge into, because once you start questioning what's real and what's wishful thinking about Atlantis, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing our global community of curious night owls gathering together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in ancient Athens around 360 BCE, watching as an elderly philosopher named Plato scratches away at papyrus with a reed pen. The afternoon sun streams through the columns of his academy, and you can hear the distant chatter of students debating geometry and ethics. What you're witnessing is the birth of one of history's most enduring mysteries, though Plato himself would probably chuckle at how seriously we've taken his little thought experiment. See, Plato wasn't trying to write a history textbook when he introduced Atlantis in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. He was crafting what we'd call today a philosophical allegory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the inevitable fall of civilizations that grow too proud and powerful. Think of it as ancient Greece's version of a dystopian novel, except instead of teenagers fighting in gladiatorial games, you get an entire continent swallowed by the sea because its people forgot their place in the cosmic order. The story goes that Solon, Athens' great lawgiver, learned about Atlantis during his travels to Egypt around 590 BCE. Egyptian priests supposedly told him about this magnificent island nation that existed 9,000 years before their conversation, making Atlantis roughly 11,600 years old by our calendar. These priests described a civilization so advanced it made Athens look like a collection of mud huts with concentric rings of land and water, incredible architecture, and military might that could challenge the gods themselves. But here's where it gets deliciously ironic. Plato was essentially creating ancient fan fiction. He took real places he knew, like the very real Egyptian city of Sais, where Solon actually did visit, and wove them into a narrative designed to make his fellow Athenians think twice about their own imperial ambitions. It's like if someone today wrote a story about a lost civilization on Mars to warn us about climate change, and then future archaeologists spent centuries digging up the Sahara looking for Martian ruins. Historians still argue whether Plato based his Atlantis on any real civilization, or if he invented the whole thing from scratch, like an ancient George Lucas, creating his own galaxy far, far away. Some scholars point to the detailed descriptions of Atlantean society, their laws, customs, and even their peculiar obsession with the number 10, as evidence that Plato drew inspiration from actual cultures he'd encountered or heard about through travelers' tales. The really fascinating part is how Plato describes Atlantis' downfall. It wasn't conquered by enemies or destroyed by plague. It was consumed by its own success. The Atlanteans became so wealthy and powerful that they lost their moral compass, becoming greedy and aggressive. The gods, particularly Poseidon, who had originally blessed the island, decided enough was enough and sent earthquakes and floods to sink the entire civilization in a single day and night. Talk about divine intervention with extreme prejudice. What makes this story even more intriguing is that Plato never actually finished it. The Critias dialogue cuts off mid-sentence, leaving us hanging like viewers of a canceled TV series. Did he get bored with his own creation? Did he realize people were taking it too literally? Or did he simply run out of papyrus at the worst possible moment? We'll never know, but that unfinished ending has given conspiracy theorists and amateur archaeologists enough wiggle room to fill libraries with speculation. You can almost picture Plato's students gathering around him, hanging on every word as he described the crystal-clear canals of Atlantis and its magnificent temples. Little did he know that his philosophical parable would outlive the entire Greek civilization and continue captivating imaginations more than 2 millennia later. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that leave us wanting more. You're now holding a world map, but instead of the usual suspects like Paris or Tokyo, you're marking every single place someone has claimed to be the real Atlantis. Congratulations! You've just created the most confusing treasure map in human history, with X's scattered from the Arctic Circle to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. If Atlantis hunters were frequent flyers, they'd have enough miles to circle the globe about 17 times by now. The search for Atlantis has turned into humanity's longest-running game of geographical hide-and-seek, with everyone convinced they've found the winning hiding spot. You've got researchers pointing confidently at the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean, obviously, the Caribbean, the North Sea, and even, brace yourself, Antarctica. Yes, some people genuinely believe that beneath miles of ice lies a tropical paradise that once housed the world's most advanced civilization. That's either impressive optimism or a fundamental misunderstanding of how ice ages work. Let's start with the Mediterranean crowd, who at least have the advantage of being in Plato's general neighborhood. The island of Santorini, formerly known as Thera, sits like a crescent moon in the Aegean Sea, and it's got a compelling backstory involving a massive volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE. This explosion was so catastrophic, it probably inspired half the flood myths in the ancient world, including possibly the biblical account of Noah. The Minoan civilization on nearby Crete suddenly declined around the same time, leading some to wonder if Plato heard garbled stories about this real disaster and retrofitted them into his Atlantis narrative. Then you have the Atlantic Ocean purists who take Plato literally when he places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. These folks have proposed everything from a sunken landmass near the Azores to a civilization that once thrived where the mid-Atlantic ridge now sits. The problem is that the ocean floor in these areas is about as geologically stable as a house of cards in a hurricane, making it unlikely that any large landmass could have simply vanished without leaving more obvious traces. But wait, there's more. Some enterprising researchers have placed Atlantis in the North Sea, arguing that Doggerland, a real landmass that connected Britain to continental Europe during the last ice age, fits Plato's description if you squint hard enough and ignore most of the details. Others have ventured to the Caribbean, pointing to underwater formations near Bimini in the Bahamas that look suspiciously like roads or walls, though geologists insist they're just natural rock formations that happen to have very good architectural taste. The truly ambitious Atlantis hunters have gone global. You'll find theories placing the lost civilization in the Sahara Desert back when it was green and lush, under the Black Sea, which did experience dramatic flooding around 5600 BCE, in the Indian Ocean, and even in the South China Sea. There's something almost admirable about the human capacity to look at any body of water and think, yep, that's probably where Atlantis is hiding. Historians still argue whether this geographical free-for-all represents legitimate scientific inquiry or just wishful thinking with better maps. The challenge is that Plato's description is simultaneously specific enough to sound convincing and vague enough to fit almost anywhere if you're creative with your interpretations. It's like trying to find someone based on the description tall, dark, and handsome. Technically accurate for millions of people, but not particularly helpful for identification purposes. One of the more entertaining theories places Atlantis in Ireland, based on the work of Swedish geographer Ulf Erlingsson, who noted that Ireland's dimensions roughly match Plato's description if you convert ancient Egyptian measurements correctly. According to this theory, the Pillars of Hercules weren't in Gibraltar, but somewhere near the English Channel, and the Atlantic Ocean was actually just a large lake. It's the kind of theory that makes you wonder if ancient geography was more like a game of telephone played across centuries. The Antarctica hypothesis deserves special mention for sheer audacity. Proponents argue that before the continent froze over, it was positioned differently and enjoyed a temperate climate perfect for advanced civilization. They point to the Peary race map of 1513, which seems to show Antarctica's coastline before it was officially discovered as evidence of ancient knowledge. Of course, this requires believing that an entire continent somehow migrated to the South Pole and froze solid, which is roughly as likely as your refrigerator spontaneously relocating to your neighbor's kitchen. What's fascinating is how each proposed location reflects the cultural biases and geographical knowledge of its proponents. European researchers tend to favor Mediterranean or Atlantic locations, While American theorists often gravitate toward the Caribbean or Pacific sites, it's as if Atlantis has become a mirror reflecting our own assumptions about where important civilizations should logically arise. The proliferation of Atlantis locations has created an interesting problem. If everywhere is Atlantis, then nowhere is Atlantis. You're left with the uncomfortable realization that maybe, just maybe, Plato made the whole thing up and never intended for future generations to spend centuries playing the world's most expensive game of Marco Polo with submarines and sonar equipment. You're standing on the rim of what was once a perfectly round island in the Aegean Sea, but now you're looking down into a massive caldera filled with impossibly blue water. The crescent-shaped remnants of Santorini curve around you like the fragments of a shattered dinner plate, and you can almost hear the echoes of the most catastrophic volcanic explosion in recorded human history. This is ground zero for one of the most compelling theories about what might have inspired Plato's Atlantis. And honestly, after seeing this place, you start to understand why ancient peoples might have thought the gods themselves had intervened. Around 1600 BCE, this wasn't a picturesque tourist destination with whitewashed buildings and Instagram-worthy sunsets. This was Thera, a thriving volcanic island that sat at the heart of the Minoan trade network, like an ancient version of Singapore. The Minoans had built a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that would make most modern city planners weep with envy, complete with indoor plumbing, multi-story buildings, and frescoes so beautiful they still take your breath away today. Then, in what might be history's most dramatic example of location going horribly wrong, the volcano decided to redecorate. The eruption that followed was so massive, it makes Mount Vesuvius look like a firecracker. We're talking about an explosion that ejected roughly 60 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and pumice into the atmosphere. Enough material to bury the entire state of Rhode Island under 30 feet of volcanic debris. The sound alone probably traveled halfway around the world, like nature's own version of a cosmic door slam. The Minoan settlement at Akrotiri, buried under all that volcanic material, has become archaeology's version of Pompeii, except the residents apparently had enough warning to evacuate. You won't find any tragic plaster casts of people caught in their final moments here, just empty buildings that preserve a snapshot of Bronze Age life in stunning detail. The frescoes show dolphins leaping through blue waters, young men boxing, and women in elaborate dresses that would fit right in at a modern fashion show. It's like walking through a time capsule that someone forgot to open for 3,600 years. But here's where things get really interesting for our Atlantis connection. The Thera eruption didn't just destroy one island, it triggered a domino effect that may have toppled an entire civilization. The massive tsunami that followed the explosion would have devastated coastal settlements across the eastern Mediterranean, and the ash cloud would have caused climate disruption for years. Historians still argue whether this single volcanic event was enough to bring down the mighty Minoan civilization, but the timing is suspiciously coincidental. The Minoans were the ancient world's maritime superstars, with a naval empire that controlled trade routes from Egypt to Troy. Their capital at Knossos on Crete featured the famous labyrinth associated with the myth of the Minotaur, and their ships carried everything from precious metals to exotic spices across the Mediterranean. They had a writing system, Linear A, that we still can't fully decipher, which only adds to their mysterious appeal. In many ways, they fit Plato's description of Atlantis better than any purely fictional civilization should. Consider the parallels: an advanced island civilization with impressive architecture, sophisticated art, and maritime dominance that suddenly vanished from history. The Minoans even had a thing for bulls, which shows up in Plato's Atlantis story as ritual bull sacrifices. Plus, they disappeared at roughly the right time to become a distant memory by the time Egyptian priests were supposedly telling Solon about ancient catastrophes. The really compelling part is how the story might have traveled. Egyptian records from this period mention the Sea Peoples, mysterious raiders who appeared around the time of the late Bronze Age collapse and wreaked havoc across the eastern Mediterranean. Some scholars think these could have been Minoan refugees displaced by the Thera eruption and forced to turn to piracy for survival. Imagine being an Egyptian scribe trying to record stories about a powerful island civilization that vanished in fire and flood. It's exactly the kind of tale that would get more dramatic with each retelling. Of course, there are problems with the Santorini-Atlantis connection that would make any honest researcher squirm a bit. The timeline doesn't quite match Plato's account. The location is wrong. Santorini is definitely not beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and the scale is all off. Plato's Atlantis was supposedly larger than Libya and Asia combined, while Thera was more like a medium-sized island with delusions of grandeur. But maybe that's missing the point. Perhaps what matters isn't whether the Minoans were literally Atlantis, but whether their dramatic end provided the raw material for a story that would captivate imaginations for millennia. You're looking at a real civilization that achieved remarkable sophistication and then vanished almost overnight. The kind of rise and fall that makes philosophers want to write cautionary tales about hubris and divine justice. Standing here on Santorini's rim, watching the sunset paint the caldera walls in shades of gold and crimson, you can almost understand how a story about a lost paradise might grow from the ashes of a very real catastrophe. Sometimes the most powerful myths are the ones rooted in genuine tragedy. You're now walking through the dusty halls of an ancient Egyptian temple, where hieroglyphs cover every surface like the world's most elaborate wallpaper. The air smells of incense and old stone, and you can hear the soft shuffle of sandaled feet as priests go about their daily rituals. This is where Plato claimed the Atlantis story originated, passed down through Egyptian records, and eventually shared with that curious Greek lawgiver, Solon. But as you run your fingers along these carved walls, you start to wonder if the Egyptians were keeping secrets that would make modern conspiracy theorists absolutely lose their minds. The ancient Egyptians were the ultimate record keepers, documenting everything from royal births to the price of bread with obsessive detail. Their temple walls and papyrus scrolls preserve thousands of years of history, including accounts of foreign lands, trading partners, and military campaigns that read like ancient versions of diplomatic cables. If any civilization would have preserved memories of a lost Atlantean empire, it would be these folks who carved their grocery lists into stone for posterity. According to Plato's account, Egyptian priests at Sais told Solon that their records went back 8,000 years before their conversation, making them custodians of knowledge that predated most other civilizations by millennia. These priests supposedly had access to temple archives that contained stories about ancient wars, natural disasters, and the rise and fall of distant kingdoms. It's like having a library that never throws anything away, including that embarrassing poetry you wrote in middle school. Except instead of teenage angst, you're preserving the entire history of human civilization. The city of Sais, located in the Nile Delta, was indeed a major religious and administrative center during Solon's time around 590 BCE. The Temple of Neith there was famous throughout the ancient world for its learning and its priests' reputation for wisdom. Herodotus, the father of history, also visited Egypt and came away with stories that sound almost too fantastic to believe, talking about underground labyrinths, sacred crocodiles, and customs so exotic they made Greek culture look positively mundane by comparison. But here's where things get intriguingly murky. Despite their meticulous record keeping, no surviving Egyptian text explicitly mentions Atlantis by name. You'd think that if the Egyptians had detailed accounts of a massive island empire that challenged their civilization and then vanished in a cosmic tantrum, someone would have carved it into a temple wall or scribbled it on a papyrus shopping list. Yet the silence is deafening, like trying to find your car keys when you're already late for work. However, Egyptian records do contain tantalizing references that make you wonder if they knew more than they let on. The famous Sea Peoples inscriptions describe mysterious invaders who arrived from the islands in the midst of the sea and caused chaos throughout the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE. These raiders had names like the Peleset, Tjeker, and Denyen, groups that appeared suddenly, wreaked havoc, and then largely disappeared from history. Some scholars think these could be garbled memories of Atlantean refugees, though that might be giving ancient record keepers more credit for accuracy than they deserve. There's also the curious case of Egyptian flood myths that parallel stories from other cultures. The Egyptians told stories about the goddess Sekhmet nearly destroying humanity in a great deluge, only to be stopped at the last moment by divine intervention, involving large quantities of beer, which honestly sounds like the most Egyptian solution to a cosmic crisis imaginable. These flood narratives might preserve echoes of real catastrophic events that affected multiple civilizations simultaneously. Historians still argue whether Egyptian priests would have shared their most sacred knowledge with a foreign visitor like Solon, or if they might have embellished their stories to impress their Greek guest. Ancient hospitality often involved a certain amount of creative storytelling. Think of it as the original version of trying to make your hometown sound more interesting to tourists. Oh yes, We definitely have records of lost civilizations, very impressive ones. Would you like to hear about our sacred crocodiles too? The really fascinating possibility is that Egyptian priests might have been synthesizing stories from multiple sources: Minoan refugees, sea people's accounts, flood myths, and their own cultural memories into a composite narrative that captured something true about the cyclical nature of civilizations rising and falling. They were essentially creating ancient historical fiction based on real events, like a Bronze Age version of historical novels that blend fact with dramatic license. Consider that Egyptian civilization had already witnessed the rise and fall of numerous kingdoms and empires by Solon's time. They'd seen the Old Kingdom build the pyramids and then collapse, watched the Middle Kingdom rise and fall, and survived invasions, famines, and political upheavals that would have destroyed less resilient cultures. To them, the idea that a powerful civilization could vanish overnight wasn't theoretical. It was Tuesday. The priests at Sais would have been walking libraries of oral tradition, preserving stories passed down through generations of temple scribes and religious officials. In a culture where knowledge was literally carved in stone, the idea of a lost civilization wouldn't have seemed far-fetched. It would have seemed inevitable. Every empire they'd known had eventually crumbled, so why not one more? What makes this even more intriguing is that the Egyptians had extensive trade networks that reached far beyond the Mediterranean. Their ships traveled to Punt, possibly modern-day Somalia. Their merchants traded with Mesopotamia, and their influence extended into Nubia and the Levant. If any ancient civilization would have heard whispers about distant lands and lost kingdoms, it would have been Egypt, sitting at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean world, like an ancient information hub. You're now descending into the crystal clear waters of the Mediterranean, your diving gear allowing you to breathe easily as you explore what might be the most humbling experience in archaeology, discovering that the ocean floor is absolutely littered with lost cities that make Atlantis look like amateur hour. The irony is delicious. While everyone's been hunting for Plato's fictional paradise, the sea has been quietly hoarding dozens of real civilizations that actually did vanish beneath the waves. It's like searching for unicorns while ignoring the herd of actual horses grazing in your backyard. Welcome to the world of underwater archaeology, where every dive might reveal another lost civilization that nobody bothered to mythologize. The Mediterranean alone contains more sunken cities than a pessimistic urban planner's worst nightmare. You've got Heraklion off the coast of Egypt, which was swallowed by the sea around the 8th century CE after earthquakes and rising waters claimed what was once a thriving port city. Then there's Pavlopatri off southern Greece, dating back 5,000 years and featuring streets, buildings, and courtyards that are so well preserved you could practically move in tomorrow if you don't mind the commute involving scuba gear. The ancient city of Thonis Heraklion, discovered in 2000 by French underwater archaeologist Frank Godiot, reads like something straight out of an adventure novel. This was Egypt's most important port before Alexandria stole its thunder, complete with massive temples, colossal statues, and harbors that welcomed ships from across the known world. The city sank gradually over several centuries due to a combination of earthquakes, tsunamis, and soil liquefaction. Basically, the ground turned into quicksand and decided to take a very long nap underwater. What makes these discoveries so fascinating is how perfectly preserved they are compared to land-based archaeological sites. When a city sinks, it's like hitting the pause button on history. You don't get centuries of subsequent civilizations building on top of the ruins, or farmers plowing through ancient foundations, or tourists chipping off souvenirs. Instead, you get a snapshot of daily life frozen in time, protected by layers of sediment and the ocean's natural preservation properties. Take the Roman city of Baiae, near Naples, which was essentially the Las Vegas of the ancient world, a luxury resort town where wealthy Romans went to party, conduct shady business deals, and engage in the kind of behavior that would make their ancestors roll over in their marble tombs. The city gradually sank due to volcanic activity, and now you can swim through the remains of villas where Julius Caesar and Cleopatra once vacationed. It's like snorkeling through ancient celebrity gossip magazines, except the celebrities are all dead and the magazines are made of stone. But perhaps the most mind-blowing underwater discovery is Dwarka, off the coast of India, which some believe could be the legendary city described in Hindu texts as Krishna's capital. Marine archaeologists have found massive stone structures, walls, and what appear to be planned urban layouts dating back thousands of years. Historians still argue whether these ruins represent the mythical Dwarka or just another example of how humans have always been remarkably good at building cities in places that eventually become inconveniently underwater. The technology used to explore these sunken worlds would make Jacques Cousteau weep with joy. Modern underwater archaeologists deploy everything from remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, to sophisticated sonar mapping systems that can create detailed 3D models of submerged sites. They use underwater metal detectors, pneumatic tools for excavation, and specialized cameras that can capture high-resolution images in low-light conditions. It's like having a complete archaeological toolkit that happens to work 100 feet underwater. One of the most intriguing aspects of underwater archaeology is how it's constantly rewriting our understanding of ancient sea levels and climate change. Many of these cities didn't sink because of dramatic catastrophes. They were gradually claimed by rising waters over centuries or millennia. The end of the last ice age saw sea levels rise by roughly 400 feet, which means vast areas of the continental shelf that were once dry land are now underwater. Imagine how many Stone Age settlements are sitting on the ocean floor, waiting to be discovered by some future archaeologist with really good diving equipment. The preservation conditions underwater can be absolutely miraculous. Wood that would have rotted away centuries ago on land can survive for millennia in the right underwater conditions. Organic materials like rope, leather, and even food remains can be preserved in ways that would be impossible in terrestrial sites. It's like the ocean has been running the world's largest and most patient museum, carefully cataloging human history one sunken city at a time. What's particularly amusing is how these real underwater discoveries often surpass the fantastical descriptions of Atlantis in terms of actual archaeological significance. While people debate whether Plato's island paradise ever existed, marine archaeologists are busy documenting actual advanced civilizations that built sophisticated harbors, developed complex trade networks, and created art and architecture that rivals anything described in ancient texts. The challenge, of course, is that underwater excavation is exponentially more difficult and expensive than traditional archaeology. Every dive is limited by air supply, weather conditions, and the physical demands of working in an aquatic environment. It's like trying to conduct delicate scientific research while wearing a spacesuit and holding your breath, except instead of zero gravity, you're dealing with currents, limited visibility, and the occasional curious shark wondering what you're doing in their neighborhood. You're now entering the realm where Atlantis transforms from Plato's philosophical parable into something that would make even the most imaginative science fiction writers blush with envy. Welcome to the New Age interpretation of Atlantis, where crystal technology powered flying machines, telepathic dolphins served as advisors, and the average Atlantean had more psychic abilities than a comic book superhero convention. It's like someone took the original story, fed it through a kaleidoscope, and then asked a particularly creative yoga instructor to fill in the missing details. The modern mystical version of Atlantis bears about as much resemblance to Plato's original as a unicorn does to a horse. Sure, they're both four-legged creatures, but one of them exists and the other shoots rainbows. In this reimagined paradise, Atlanteans didn't just build impressive architecture. They constructed entire cities using the power of sound vibrations and crystal harmonics. Their technology was supposedly so advanced, it made our current civilization look like we're still banging rocks together to make fire, which is either inspiring or deeply insulting, depending on your perspective. The crystal obsession in New Age Atlantis theories deserves special mention because it's reached levels that would make even the most dedicated rock collector nervous. According to these accounts, Atlanteans used massive crystals as power sources, communication devices, healing tools, and probably coffee makers, for all we know. The famous fire crystals, or Tuawi stones, were supposedly so powerful they could harness energy from the sun, stars, and other dimensions simultaneously. It's like having a smartphone that also functions as a nuclear reactor and meditation app, which honestly sounds both amazing and terrifying. Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, deserves much of the credit or blame for transforming Atlantis from ancient philosophy into modern mysticism. During his psychic readings in the early 20th century, Case claimed to access Akashic records, essentially a cosmic library containing the history of every soul that ever existed. According to his visions, Atlantis was a technological and spiritual paradise that existed for over 200,000 years before its inhabitants got carried away with genetic experiments and crystal-powered weapons. It's like a very long-running reality show that ended with the ultimate season finale. Casey's Atlanteans were apparently masters of genetic engineering, creating everything from helpful animal-human hybrids to creatures that would give modern bioethicists nightmares for weeks. They could supposedly manipulate matter at the molecular level, travel through time and space using crystal-powered vehicles, and communicate telepathically across vast distances. The only thing they couldn't figure out, apparently, was how to avoid destroying themselves with their own technology, which is either a cautionary tale about hubris or proof that even advanced civilizations struggle with instruction manuals. The spiritual aspects of New Age Atlantis make the technological claims look positively mundane by comparison. In this version, Atlanteans were highly evolved souls who incarnated on Earth to help humanity's spiritual development. They practiced advanced forms of meditation, could access multiple dimensions of consciousness, and maintained direct communication with extraterrestrial beings who served as cosmic guidance counselors. It's like having a civilization where everyone was simultaneously a rocket scientist, a monk, and a character from Star Trek. Historians still argue whether these elaborate New Age interpretations represent genuine spiritual insights or just really creative fan fiction, but there's no denying their cultural impact. The mystical Atlantis has spawned countless books, workshops, meditation practices, and healing modalities that promise to reconnect modern humans with their supposed Atlantean heritage. You can apparently recover memories of past lives in Atlantis, learn to use crystal technology for healing, and even channel the wisdom of ancient Atlantean masters who are presumably still hanging around in higher dimensions, waiting to offer cosmic life advice. The healing crystal industry has particularly embraced the Atlantean connection, with practitioners claiming that certain stones carry the vibrational frequencies of ancient Atlantean technology. Quartz crystals, amethyst, and other minerals are said to retain the programming from Atlantean healing temples, allowing modern users to access therapeutic energies that are thousands of years old. It's like having vintage technology that never goes out of style, except instead of a classic car, you're driving a rock that supposedly remembers being a cosmic computer. What's fascinating is how the New Age Atlantis serves as a mirror for contemporary anxieties and aspirations. The emphasis on environmental harmony reflects modern concerns about climate change and sustainability. The advanced technology that works in harmony with nature appeals to people who feel alienated by our current industrial civilization. The spiritual evolution aspects speak to those seeking meaning beyond material success. In many ways, the mystical Atlantis is less about the past and more about what we wish the future could become. The extraterrestrial connections in some Atlantis theories add another layer of cosmic complexity. Some accounts describe Atlanteans as descendants of star beings who came to Earth to establish an advanced civilization. Others suggest that Atlantean technology was gifted by benevolent aliens who wanted to help humanity evolve. There are even theories that the destruction of Atlantis was orchestrated by malevolent extraterrestrials who were threatened by human spiritual development. It's like a cosmic soap opera with really high production values and a budget that includes entire planets. The irony is that while New Age enthusiasts search for evidence of crystal technology and psychic abilities in ancient Atlantis, they're often overlooking the genuine mysteries and achievements of real ancient civilizations. The builders of Stonehenge, the pyramid architects, and the creators of the Antikythera mechanism accomplished things that still puzzle modern scientists. But apparently, that's not mystical enough when you could be channeling memories of flying crystal ships instead. You're now stepping into one of the darkest chapters in Atlantis's modern history, where a harmless philosophical allegory got twisted into something that would have made Plato burn his own manuscripts in horror. Welcome to Nazi Germany, where occultists and pseudoscientists transformed the lost civilization into a cornerstone of racial ideology, so toxic it makes you wonder if some stories are better left buried deeper than any sunken continent. It's like watching your favorite childhood fairy tale get turned into a propaganda film by people who completely missed the point and added way too much hatred for seasoning. The Nazi obsession with Atlantis didn't emerge in a vacuum. It grew out of a broader fascination with ancient mysteries, lost civilizations, and anything that could be twisted to support their deranged theories about Aryan racial superiority. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and part-time collector of occult nonsense, established the Unanswered Ancestral Heritage Organization in 1935, specifically to find scientific evidence for Nazi racial theories. They sent expeditions to Tibet, excavated Germanic archaeological sites, and yes, searched for traces of Atlantis with the enthusiasm of treasure hunters who'd completely lost their moral compass. According to Nazi pseudo-historians, Atlantis wasn't just any advanced civilization. It was the original homeland of the Aryan race, populated by blonde-haired, blue-eyed supermen who possessed both advanced technology and inherent racial superiority. In their twisted interpretation, the destruction of Atlantis scattered these superior beings across the globe, where they became the founding stock of all great civilizations. It's like taking Plato's cautionary tale about hubris and turning it into a recruitment poster for genetic supremacists, which is probably the most spectacular misreading of ancient literature in human history. The Nazi version of Atlantean history reads like a fever dream written by someone who'd consumed too much Wagner and not enough actual scholarship. They claimed that Atlanteans had developed advanced aircraft, energy weapons, and genetic engineering techniques that allowed them to maintain racial purity. The fall of Atlantis, in their telling, wasn't caused by divine punishment for moral corruption, but by racial mixing and the influence of inferior peoples who corrupted the pure Atlantean bloodline. It's the kind of historical revisionism that would be laughable if it hadn't been used to justify some of humanity's worst atrocities. Hans F. K. Günther, a prominent Nazi racial theorist, wrote extensively about the supposed connection between Nordic peoples and ancient Atlanteans. He argued that archaeological evidence of advanced prehistoric cultures in Northern Europe proved the existence of an Atlantean master race that had spread civilization across the world before being corrupted by contact with lesser peoples. Historians still argue whether Günther actually believed this nonsense or was just cynically manufacturing academic-sounding justifications for predetermined political conclusions. But the damage was done either way. The really disturbing part is how the Nazis used Atlantis theories to justify their expansionist policies and genocidal programs. If Germans were the descendants of superior Atlantean stock, then they had not only the right, but the obligation to reclaim their ancestral territories and eliminate the inferior races that had supposedly caused Atlantis' downfall. It's like using your family tree to justify robbing your neighbors, except the family tree is completely fictional, and the robbery involves invading entire countries. The Thule Society, an occult group that influenced early Nazi ideology, was particularly enamored with Atlantis theories. They believed that Atlantean survivors had established a secret kingdom called Thule in the Arctic, where they preserved ancient wisdom and advanced technology. Some members even claimed that these Atlantean descendants would eventually return to reclaim the world, with Germans serving as their earthly representatives. It's the kind of mythology that sounds like it was written by someone who read too many adventure novels and not enough actual history books. What makes this historical perversion even more tragic is how it contaminated legitimate archaeological research for decades. After World War II, any serious discussion of advanced prehistoric civilizations or possible connections between ancient cultures became suspect because of its association with Nazi ideology. Researchers had to be extremely careful not to sound like they were promoting racial theories, which probably slowed down genuine scientific inquiry into human prehistory. It's like having one group of people ruin a perfectly good research topic by using it to justify terrible things. The Nazi Atlantis obsession also extended to their search for occult artifacts and ancient technologies. They believed that finding remnants of Atlantean civilization would provide them with superweapons that could guarantee victory in World War II. SS expeditions scoured the globe looking for everything from the Holy Grail to Atlantean energy crystals, apparently convinced that ancient mystical objects would be more effective than conventional military strategy. It's the kind of thinking that makes you wonder if they confused real life with an Indiana Jones movie, except with significantly worse moral judgment. The influence of these twisted interpretations didn't end with Nazi Germany's defeat. Various neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups have continued to promote Atlantis theories as evidence for racial superiority, often mixing them with UFO conspiracies and other fringe beliefs. It's like a toxic intellectual inheritance that keeps getting passed down to people who should probably find healthier hobbies like stamp collecting or learning to play the harmonica. The tragedy is that this racist appropriation of Atlantis has overshadowed the story's original purpose as a philosophical meditation on power, corruption, and the cyclical nature of civilizations. Plato's Atlantis was meant to warn against the very kind of hubris and moral blindness that the Nazis embodied, making their adoption of it as a racial myth one of history's most ironic misreadings. It's like using 1984 as an instruction manual for totalitarian government, technically possible, but completely missing the point in the most dangerous way imaginable. You're now settling into a plush movie theater seat, popcorn in hand, as the opening credits roll for what might be cinema's most enduring love affair with a civilization that probably never existed. Hollywood has taken Plato's philosophical allegory and transformed it into everything from swashbuckling adventures to animated fishtales, proving that when it comes to Atlantis, the entertainment industry has never met a plot device it couldn't monetize. It's like watching someone take a serious academic paper and turn it into a theme park ride. Technically impressive, but you're pretty sure this wasn't what the original author had in mind. The cinematic journey of Atlantis began in the silent film era, but it really hit its stride in 1961 with Atlantis, The Lost Continent, a George Pal production that featured all the classic elements. A Greek fisherman who discovers the lost city, falls in love with an Atlantean princess, and witnesses the civilization's destruction through a combination of volcanic activity and moral decay. The film's special effects were cutting edge for their time, which means they now look like someone built elaborate models in their garage and filmed them with a particularly enthusiastic home movie camera. But perhaps no single work has done more to shape popular perceptions of Atlantis than Disney's 2001 animated film, Atlantis, The Lost Empire. This movie took the bold step of imagining Atlantis as a steampunk wonderland powered by a mystical crystal, complete with flying fish-shaped vehicles, and a culture that somehow survived for thousands of years in an air bubble under the ocean. The film's Atlanteans spoke a constructed language created by linguist Mark Okrand, who also invented Klingon, because apparently even fictional civilizations need proper grammar rules. The Disney version introduced millions of children to an Atlantis that was part ancient civilization, part science fiction adventure, and part environmental parable about the dangers of exploiting natural resources. The movie's crystal-powered technology and bioluminescent aesthetics created a visual language for Atlantis that continues to influence how we imagine the lost city today. It's like having an entire generation grow up thinking that all ancient civilizations probably had glowing blue energy sources and submarines shaped like marine animals. Television hasn't been shy about diving into Atlantean waters either. The Stargate Atlantis series reimagined the Lost City as an advanced alien outpost in another galaxy, complete with spacefaring technology and a city that could literally fly between planets. This version of Atlantis was populated by the Ancients, a race of beings who had evolved beyond physical existence but left behind technology so advanced it might as well be magic. It's the kind of show that makes you wonder if the writers were trying to one-up every previous Atlantis story by adding more zeros to the technology specifications. The James Cameron connection to Atlantis deserves special mention, not just because of his underwater filming expertise, but because his work on The Abyss and Titanic demonstrated how modern filmmaking could bring underwater civilizations to life with unprecedented realism. While neither film explicitly featured Atlantis, they established visual and narrative templates that influenced how subsequent movies would approach sunken cities and underwater mysteries. Cameron's attention to the physics and psychology of deep-sea exploration added a layer of scientific credibility to what had previously been pure fantasy. Comic books and graphic novels have had their own field day with Atlantis, most notably through DC Comics' Aquaman and Marvel's Namor the Submariner. These characters transformed Atlantis from a lost civilization into a thriving underwater kingdom with its own politics, military conflicts, and environmental concerns. Historians still argue whether turning Atlantis into a superhero setting trivializes its philosophical origins or actually makes ancient themes more accessible to modern audiences. But there's no denying that comic book Atlantis has probably reached more people than Plato's original dialogues ever did. The video game industry has embraced Atlantis with the enthusiasm of treasure hunters who've discovered that digital archaeology pays better than the real thing. Games like Atlantis, The Lost Tales, and various installments in the Tomb Raider series have allowed players to explore their own versions of the Lost City, complete with puzzles, traps, and enough ancient technology to make an archaeologist weep with either joy or frustration. It's like having a choose-your-own-adventure book where every choice leads to discovering another impossibly advanced ancient gadget. What's particularly fascinating is how each era's interpretation of Atlantis reflects contemporary anxieties and technological capabilities. The 1960s versions emphasize nuclear destruction and Cold War tensions. The 1990s and 2000s focused on environmental themes and computer-generated spectacle. More recent interpretations often incorporate concerns about climate change, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence. It's like Atlantis serves as a cultural mirror, reflecting whatever we're most excited or worried about at any given moment. The special effects evolution in Atlantis movies tells its own story about technological progress. Early films relied on elaborate miniatures, matte paintings, and practical effects that required genuine craftsmanship and ingenuity. Modern productions can create entire underwater cities using computer graphics, allowing filmmakers to realize visions that would have been impossible just decades ago. The irony is that as our ability to visualize Atlantis has become more sophisticated, the stories themselves have sometimes become less imaginative, as if having unlimited visual possibilities somehow constrains narrative creativity. The merchandising empire built around cinematic Atlantis would probably make the ancient Atlanteans proud, assuming they were into capitalism. You can buy everything from Atlantean crystal replicas to underwater city playsets, proving that even fictional civilizations can generate very real economic activity. It's like having an entire industry based on something that never existed, which is either a testament to human imagination or evidence that will literally buy anything if it's packaged attractively enough. You're now standing at the crossroads where rigorous scientific method meets the irresistible human desire to believe in something magical. And honestly, it's like watching a very polite wrestling match between your rational brain and your inner child who still believes in treasure maps. Welcome to the world where geologists armed with core samples and sonar equipment go head to head with enthusiasts wielding dowsing rods and ancient astronaut theories, all searching for evidence of Atlantis in their own distinctly different ways. The scientific approach to Atlantis hunting involves the kind of methodical detective work that would make Sherlock Holmes proud. If Sherlock Holmes had access to submersible vehicles and ground-penetrating radar. Marine geologists study seafloor sediment cores that preserve thousands of years of geological history, looking for evidence of sudden catastrophic events that might explain the disappearance of coastal civilizations. They analyze volcanic ash layers, tsunami deposits, and changes in sea level with the precision of accountants auditing the Earth's financial records, except instead of looking for missing money, they're searching for missing continents. Dr. Robert Ballard, the oceanographer who discovered the Titanic, has brought his considerable expertise to bear on the Atlantis question with characteristic scientific rigor. His expeditions have explored underwater formations in the Black Sea, Mediterranean, and Atlantic Ocean, using advanced sonar mapping and remotely operated vehicles to document submerged landscapes that were once dry land. Ballard's approach is refreshingly honest. He's not looking for Plato's Atlantis specifically, but rather investigating how dramatic changes in sea level and geological activity might have inspired stories about lost civilizations. The geological evidence for catastrophic events in the Mediterranean region is actually quite compelling, even if it doesn't support the existence of a continent-sized island empire. The Messinian salinity crisis, which occurred about 5.96 million years ago, saw the Mediterranean Sea almost completely dry up when the connection to the Atlantic was severed. When the Gibraltar Gateway reopened, the resulting flood was so massive it would have made Noah's deluge look like a minor plumbing leak. Historians still argue whether any human ancestors were around to witness this event, but it demonstrates that the Mediterranean has a history of dramatic transformations that could easily inspire flood myths. Modern underwater archaeology employs technology that would seem like magic to ancient civilizations, and probably to most modern humans as well. Side-scan sonar can map the seafloor in exquisite detail, revealing structures and formations that might indicate human activity. Magnetometers detect metal objects buried beneath sediment, while sub-bottom profilers use sound waves to create cross-sectional images of what lies beneath the ocean floor. It's like having X-ray vision for the entire planet, except instead of seeing through Superman's costume, you're peering through thousands of years of accumulated mud and sand. The challenge for legitimate researchers is separating genuine archaeological anomalies from natural geological formations that happen to look suspiciously artificial. Underwater rock formations can create patterns that appear almost architectural, especially when photographed from certain angles or enhanced with creative lighting. The famous Bimini Road in the Bahamas, long claimed by Atlantis enthusiasts as evidence of ancient construction, has been thoroughly studied by geologists who concluded it's a natural formation of beach rock, limestone that forms in shallow tropical waters and can create remarkably regular patterns that look like ancient roadways. The confirmation bias problem in Atlantis research is so pronounced, it should probably be studied by psychologists as a textbook example of how humans can convince themselves of almost anything given sufficient motivation. When you're looking for evidence of a lost civilization, every unusual rock formation becomes a potential temple. Every geometric pattern in the seafloor becomes a possible city plan, and every unexplained sonar reading becomes proof of advanced ancient technology. It's like having a hammer and discovering that suddenly everything looks like a nail, except the hammer is wishful thinking and the nails are random geological features. Legitimate marine archaeologists face the frustrating challenge of conducting serious research in a field that's been thoroughly contaminated by pseudoscientific claims and sensationalized media coverage. When you're trying to study genuine underwater archaeological sites, you constantly have to distinguish your work from treasure hunters, conspiracy theorists, and documentary filmmakers who are more interested in dramatic narratives than careful scientific methodology. It's like being a real doctor trying to practice medicine in a world where everyone thinks they're a medical expert because they watched a few episodes of a medical drama. The statistical problem with Atlantis claims is particularly amusing to anyone who understands probability theory. Given the vast size of the world's oceans and the thousands of years of human coastal settlement, it would be more surprising if there weren't numerous underwater archaeological sites waiting to be discovered. Finding submerged ruins doesn't prove the existence of Atlantis any more than finding a sunken ship proves the existence of pirates. It just proves that humans have been building things near water for a very long time, and water levels change. Climate science has added another layer of complexity to Atlantis research by demonstrating how dramatically sea levels have changed throughout human history. The end of the last ice age saw global sea levels rise by approximately 120 meters, 400 feet, which means vast areas of the continental shelf that were once habitable land are now underwater. This doesn't prove that Atlantis existed, but it does suggest that there are probably numerous Stone Age, and Bronze Age settlements on the ocean floor that we haven't discovered yet. The peer review process in legitimate Atlantis research is particularly rigorous, partly because the field attracts so many fringe theories that respectable journals are extra cautious about publishing anything that might be misconstrued as supporting pseudoscientific claims. Researchers have to present evidence that meets the highest standards of scientific methodology, with multiple independent confirmations and careful consideration of alternative explanations. It's like having to prove your case to a jury of skeptical scientists who've heard every possible variation of I Found Atlantis and aren't impressed by anything less than absolutely bulletproof evidence. The irony is that while scientists apply increasingly sophisticated methods to search for evidence of lost civilizations, they're often discovering things that are far more interesting than anything Plato imagined. Real underwater archaeological sites reveal complex ancient societies with their own fascinating technologies, art forms, and cultural achievements that don't need to be connected to mythical Atlantis to be worthy of study and preservation. You're now venturing into the realm of Atlantis's lesser-known cousins, where lost continent theories multiply like rabbits in a philosophy textbook, each one more elaborate than the last. Welcome to Lemuria, Mu, and a whole family of vanished landmasses that make Atlantis look like the sensible, well-adjusted member of a very eccentric extended family. It's like discovering that your neighborhood has not just one mysterious mansion, but an entire subdivision of haunted houses, each with its own peculiar backstory and devoted group of ghost hunters. Lemuria entered the scientific conversation in the 1860s through the work of English zoologist Philip Sclater, who was trying to solve a genuine puzzle in biogeography. He noticed that lemur fossils appeared in both Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East, which seemed to violate everything scientists understood about how species spread across continents. Sclater proposed that a now sunken continent called Lemuria had once connected these distant lands, allowing lemurs to migrate before the landmass conveniently disappeared beneath the Indian Ocean. It was solid scientific reasoning based on the best available evidence, which unfortunately makes it the last time Lemuria theory would have anything to do with actual science. The concept of continental drift wasn't yet understood in Sclater's time, so the idea of a sunken continent seemed like a reasonable explanation for puzzling fossil distributions. What Sclater couldn't have known was that India had actually drifted northward from near Antarctica to collide with Asia, carrying its lemur passengers along for the geological ride. It's like trying to explain why your car keys are in the refrigerator without knowing that your toddler has been playing hide the important things again. You come up with elaborate theories when the simple explanation isn't obvious. But then Helena Blavatsky got her hands on Lemuria, and things went completely off the scientific rails. The founder of Theosophy transformed Sclater's modest zoological hypothesis into a full-blown mystical civilization populated by 7-foot-tall hermaphroditic beings with 4 arms and psychic powers. According to Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, Lemurians were the third root race of humanity who lived on a massive continent spanning the Indian and Pacific Oceans before their civilization was destroyed by volcanic catastrophes around 700,000 years ago. Blavatsky's Lemurians made the New Age Atlanteans look positively mundane by comparison. These beings supposedly had a third eye in the back of their heads that gave them psychic vision, could reproduce by laying eggs like reptiles, and gradually evolved from hermaphroditic to sexually differentiated beings over millions of years. They also had the ability to communicate with animals, control volcanic forces, and build cities using mental powers alone. Historians still argue whether Blavatsky was genuinely channeling ancient wisdom or just had an incredibly creative imagination fueled by too much Victorian-era spiritualism and possibly some very interesting tea. The continent of Mu, popularized by British-American writer James Churchward in the early 20th century, took the lost continent concept even further into the realm of pure fantasy. According to Churchward's series of books, Mu was a massive Pacific continent that served as the cradle of human civilization, with a population of 64 million people who had mastered anti-gravity technology, weather control, and interdimensional travel. The Minoans supposedly colonized the entire world, establishing outposts that became the foundations of all subsequent civilizations before their continent sank in a global catastrophe around 12,000 years ago. Churchward claimed to have learned about Mu from ancient tablets discovered in India, Burma, and Mexico, though he never produced these tablets for independent verification. His books are filled with elaborate maps, detailed descriptions of Muyan technology, and translations of supposedly ancient text that read suspiciously like early 20th century science fiction. It's like having someone claim they discovered the lost works of Shakespeare, except the plays are all about space travel and the sonnets rhyme laser with phaser. The Pacific Ocean has become a particularly popular location for lost continent theories, partly because it's so vast that you could hide several Atlantis-sized landmasses in there without anyone noticing until relatively recently. The Ring of Fire's volcanic activity provides a convenient explanation for how entire continents could disappear, and the scattered island chains of Polynesia and Micronesia hint at what might once have been larger landmasses. It's like having a giant jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces are underwater, and you're not entirely sure what the original picture was supposed to look like. Modern geology has been rather unkind to most lost continent theories, demonstrating that the ocean floors are generally too young and geologically active to have supported large stable land masses during human history. The Pacific Ocean floor is constantly being recycled through subduction zones, making it highly unlikely that any continent-sized landmass could have existed there and then vanished without leaving obvious geological evidence. It's like trying to hide an elephant in a room full of people who specialize in elephant detection and have really good elephant detecting equipment. However, there are some legitimate lost lands that actually did exist and disappear, though they're considerably less dramatic than the mystical continents of popular imagination. Doggerland, which connected Britain to continental Europe during the last ice age, was gradually submerged as sea levels rose, forcing its inhabitants to migrate to higher ground. Beringia, the land bridge between Asia and North America, allowed human migration to the Americas before it too was claimed by rising waters. These real lost lands lack the advanced civilizations and crystal technology of their fictional cousins, but they represent genuine chapters in human prehistory. The psychological appeal of lost continent theories seems to stem from the same human needs that drive Atlantis fascination: the desire for hidden knowledge, the appeal of ancient wisdom, and the comfort of believing that someone, somewhere, once had all the answers. Lost continents represent ultimate origins, places where humanity supposedly achieved its highest potential before falling from grace through moral corruption or cosmic catastrophe. It's like having a mythological safety net that assures us that even if our current civilization fails, we've done it before and could presumably do it again. The competition between different lost continent theories has created a kind of mythological arms race, with each new version trying to outdo its predecessors in terms of size, technological advancement, and spiritual sophistication. Atlantis has advanced technology and moral philosophy. Lemuria has psychic powers and hermaphroditic reproduction. And Mu has anti-gravity and weather control. It's like watching a very polite argument between fantasy authors about whose imaginary civilization would win in a hypothetical battle. Except some people take the argument seriously enough to fund archaeological expeditions. You're now floating in orbit above Earth, watching as satellites equipped with the most sophisticated imaging technology humanity has ever developed scan the ocean floors with the methodical precision of cosmic detectives. Welcome to the 21st century's approach to Atlantis hunting, where Google Earth has turned every armchair archaeologist into a potential discoverer of lost civilizations, and where actual scientists use technology that would make Jules Verne weep with envy. It's like having the entire planet as your personal archaeological site, except instead of digging with shovels, you're excavating with algorithms and satellite imagery that can spot a sunken city from 400 miles above the surface. The modern satellite search for Atlantis represents the ultimate marriage of ancient mystery and cutting-edge technology. NASA's various Earth observation satellites, originally designed to study climate change and geological processes, have inadvertently become the most powerful tools ever deployed in the search for lost civilizations. These orbital platforms can detect subtle variations in water temperature, seafloor topography, and even gravitational anomalies that might indicate buried structures. It's like having X-ray vision for the entire planet, except instead of seeing through Superman's cape, you're peering through miles of ocean water to spot geometric patterns that shouldn't exist naturally. Google Earth deserves special recognition for democratizing the search for underwater anomalies, allowing anyone with an internet connection to become an amateur Atlantis hunter from the comfort of their living room. The platform's high-resolution satellite imagery has revealed countless underwater formations that look suspiciously artificial, from perfectly straight lines on the ocean floor to geometric patterns that seem too regular to be natural. Of course, the vast majority of these discoveries turn out to be image artifacts, underwater cables, or natural geological formations. But the democratization of satellite archaeology has created an army of citizen scientists who occasionally spot things that professional researchers might have missed. The technology behind modern underwater detection is so sophisticated, it borders on science fiction. Synthetic aperture radar, SAR, can penetrate cloud cover and even shallow water to reveal surface features that would be invisible to optical cameras. LiDAR, light detection and ranging systems, can create incredibly detailed three-dimensional maps of underwater topography, revealing structures and formations with centimeter-level precision. Multi-beam sonar arrays can map vast areas of the seafloor in exquisite detail, creating images so clear you can practically count the fish swimming overhead. Dr. Sarah Parcak, a space archaeologist at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, has pioneered the use of satellite imagery to discover archaeological sites. Though her work focuses on legitimate historical civilizations rather than mythical, lost continents, her techniques for identifying buried structures using infrared imagery and spectral analysis have revealed thousands of previously unknown archaeological sites across Egypt, Peru, and other regions. Historians still argue whether these same techniques could theoretically detect traces of Atlantis, but Parcak's work demonstrates that satellite archaeology is a legitimate scientific discipline with real discoveries to its credit. The challenge with satellite-based Atlantis hunting is distinguishing between genuine archaeological anomalies and the countless natural formations that can look remarkably artificial when viewed from space. Underwater sand dunes can create perfectly parallel lines that look like ancient roads. Coral reefs can form geometric patterns that seem too regular to be natural. Even modern human activity, underwater cables, shipwrecks, and offshore drilling operations can create features that enthusiastic researchers might mistake for evidence of ancient civilizations. It's like playing a massive game of spot the difference, where most of the differences turn out to be optical illusions or wishful thinking. The famous Atlantis discovery off the coast of Spain in 2011 illustrates both the promise and the pitfalls of satellite archaeology. Researchers using Google Earth identified what appeared to be a massive rectangular structure on the seafloor near Cadiz, complete with what looked like a grid pattern of streets and buildings. The discovery generated worldwide excitement and speculation about finally finding Plato's lost city, until marine geologists pointed out that the structures were actually sonar artifacts created by the data collection process, essentially digital ghosts created by the way underwater mapping equipment processes information. The European Space Agency's Sentinel satellites have added another layer of sophistication to underwater archaeology, using radar interferometry to detect subtle changes in sea surface height that might indicate underwater structures. This technique can theoretically identify buried features by measuring how they affect water circulation patterns and surface temperatures. It's like being able to see the shadow of a building by watching how it affects the wind patterns around it. Except instead of wind, you're tracking microscopic changes in ocean currents and thermal gradients. Modern treasure hunters and amateur archaeologists have embraced satellite technology with the enthusiasm of kids who just discovered they can use Google Maps to find their house from space. Online forums are filled with satellite images of underwater anomalies, each accompanied by elaborate theories about their possible connection to Atlantis or other lost civilizations. The democratization of satellite imagery has created a global community of citizen archaeologists who spend their evenings scanning the ocean floors for signs of ancient mysteries, though their success rate in finding actual archaeological sites remains roughly equivalent to winning the lottery while being struck by lightning. The artificial intelligence revolution has added yet another dimension to satellite-based archaeology, with machine learning algorithms trained to identify patterns that might indicate human-made structures. These AI systems can process vast amounts of satellite data far more quickly than human researchers, automatically flagging potential archaeological sites for further investigation. Of course, AI systems are only as good as their training data, and teaching a computer to distinguish between ancient ruins and natural rock formations is like trying to explain the difference between art and random paint splatters to someone who's never seen either. The irony of using 21st century technology to search for a civilization that Plato invented in the 4th century BCE is not lost on anyone with a sense of humor about human nature. We've developed the ability to map every square meter of the ocean floor with unprecedented precision, yet we're using this incredible capability to look for something that probably never existed in the first place. It's like using a supercomputer to calculate the exact location of the pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. Technically impressive, but perhaps missing the point of the original story. The real discoveries made through satellite archaeology, legitimate ancient cities, forgotten trade routes, and previously unknown archaeological sites are far more fascinating than any fictional Atlantis could be. These genuine finds reveal the complexity and sophistication of real ancient civilizations, demonstrating that human history is already full of enough mysteries and achievements without needing to invent additional lost continents to capture our imagination. You're now peering into the deepest recesses of the human psyche, where the search for Atlantis reveals more about our own psychological needs than it does about any ancient civilization. Welcome to the fascinating realm where cognitive science meets mythology, and where the persistent appeal of lost civilizations tells us something profound about how our brains are wired to process history, hope, and the uncomfortable reality that everything we build will eventually crumble. It's like discovering that our obsession with finding paradise isn't really about geography. It's about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and disappointing. The psychological appeal of lost civilizations taps into what researchers call rosy retrospection, our tendency to remember the past as better than it actually was, combined with our need to believe that someone, somewhere once had all the answers. Atlantis represents the ultimate golden age, a time when humanity supposedly achieved perfect balance between technology and spirituality, wisdom and power, progress and harmony with nature. It's like having a cosmic security blanket that assures us that if things were perfect once, they could theoretically be perfect again, which is infinitely more comforting than accepting that perfection might be an impossible goal. Dr. Carl Jung would have had a field day with Atlantis psychology, recognizing it as a perfect example of what he called the collective unconscious, shared mythological patterns that appear across cultures and throughout history. The lost golden age appears in virtually every human culture, from the Garden of Eden to the Hindu concept of Satya Yuga, suggesting that this psychological need runs deeper than any particular religious or philosophical tradition. Historians still argue whether these universal myths reflect distant memories of actual historical events or simply represent common human responses to the inevitable disappointments of real life. But the pattern is undeniably consistent across time and geography. The noble savage fantasy plays a significant role in Atlantis psychology, reflecting our tendency to project idealized qualities onto distant or vanished peoples. Just as we imagine that hunter-gatherer societies lived in perfect harmony with nature, despite archaeological evidence of prehistoric environmental destruction, we envision Atlanteans as having solved all the problems that plague modern civilization. They supposedly achieved advanced technology without environmental destruction, spiritual enlightenment without religious conflict, and social harmony without oppression or inequality. It's like believing that somewhere in the past, humans figured out how to be human without all the messy complications that make actual humanity so challenging. The psychology of conspiracy thinking also influences Atlantis beliefs, particularly the appeal of hidden knowledge that's supposedly been suppressed by mainstream academia or government authorities. Believing in Atlantis can provide a sense of intellectual superiority. You know something that the experts either don't understand or are deliberately concealing. This creates what psychologists call epistemic arrogance, the satisfying feeling that you've uncovered truths that elude less enlightened individuals. It's like being part of an exclusive club where the membership requirement is believing in something that most people consider fictional, which can be surprisingly appealing to those who feel marginalized by conventional society. The sunk cost fallacy plays an interesting role in persistent Atlantis belief, where people who have invested significant time, money, or emotional energy in searching for the lost civilization become increasingly reluctant to abandon their quest even when evidence fails to materialize. Professional Atlantis hunters often develop elaborate explanations for why their searches haven't succeeded yet. The ruins are deeper than expected, the location estimates were slightly off, or the evidence has been deliberately suppressed by mysterious forces. It's like continuing to dig a hole because you've already invested so much effort that stopping would feel like admitting failure, even when rational analysis suggests you're digging in the wrong place entirely. The psychological concept of pattern recognition gone wrong helps explain why people see evidence of Atlantis in natural geological formations, satellite images, and archaeological sites that have perfectly mundane explanations. Human brains are evolutionarily programmed to detect patterns and assign meaning to random events, which was useful for survival on the African savanna, but can lead to false positives when applied to complex modern data. We're essentially using Stone Age pattern recognition software to process 21st century information, which occasionally produces results that would make our ancestors proud, but leave modern scientists scratching their heads. The meaning-making function of Atlantis beliefs provides psychological comfort in a world that often seems random and purposeless. If advanced civilizations have risen and fallen before, then our current struggles and achievements are part of a larger cosmic pattern rather than meaningless accidents of history. Atlantis serves as proof that human potential extends far beyond our current limitations, offering hope that we might someday transcend our present difficulties and achieve something approaching perfection. It's like having a mythological insurance policy against existential despair, guaranteeing that human life has ultimate meaning, even if that meaning isn't immediately obvious. The temporal displacement aspect of Atlantis psychology allows people to criticize modern civilization indirectly by praising an idealized past, instead of directly confronting contemporary problems like environmental destruction, social inequality, or technological alienation. Atlantis believers can point to a supposedly superior ancient civilization that avoided these pitfalls. This provides a psychologically safe way to express dissatisfaction with the present without having to propose specific solutions or take personal responsibility for change. It's like complaining about your current job by constantly talking about how much better your previous workplace was, even if that previous workplace existed primarily in your imagination. The social bonding function of shared Atlantis beliefs creates communities of like-minded individuals who find meaning and connection through their common interest in ancient mysteries. Atlantis conferences, online forums, and research expeditions provide social networks for people who might otherwise feel isolated by their unconventional beliefs. These communities offer acceptance, validation, and the pleasure of shared discovery that can be deeply fulfilling, regardless of whether their central beliefs are factually accurate. It's like joining a book club where everyone is reading the same fascinating novel, except some members believe the novel is actually a historical documentary. The cognitive dissonance reduction mechanism helps explain how Atlantis believers maintain their convictions despite contradictory evidence. When faced with geological data that contradicts their theories. They might question the reliability of mainstream science rather than revising their beliefs. When archaeological discoveries fail to support Atlantean connections, they might argue that the evidence has been misinterpreted or suppressed. This psychological flexibility allows them to preserve their core beliefs while accommodating new information, which is actually a fairly sophisticated mental process, even when it leads to conclusions that scientists find frustrating. Understanding the psychology behind Atlantis beliefs doesn't necessarily invalidate the search for lost civilizations, but it does suggest that the appeal of these stories serves important psychological functions that go far beyond simple historical curiosity. Whether or not Atlantis ever existed, our need to believe in it reveals something profound about human nature and our eternal quest for meaning, purpose, and hope in an uncertain world. You're now standing at the edge of a melting glacier, watching ancient ice reveal landscapes that haven't seen sunlight for thousands of years. And suddenly, the parallels between Atlantis and our current climate crisis become impossible to ignore. The story of a civilization destroyed by its own hubris and environmental catastrophe has transformed from ancient philosophy into uncomfortably contemporary prophecy, making you wonder if Plato accidentally wrote the world's first climate change warning disguised as a philosophical allegory. It's like discovering that your favorite bedtime story was actually a documentary about the future, except instead of a happy ending, everyone drowns, and the moral of the story is maybe don't anger the planet. The environmental themes in Plato's Atlantis story read like a Bronze Age version of an inconvenient truth, complete with warnings about the consequences of prioritizing short-term prosperity over long-term sustainability. The Atlanteans supposedly became so obsessed with wealth and power that they lost their connection to the natural world, exploiting resources without regard for environmental consequences until the gods decided to hit the reset button with earthquakes and floods. Modern climate scientists reading this account probably experience the eerie sensation of déjà vu, recognizing patterns that feel disturbingly familiar despite being written over 2,000 years ago. The rising sea levels that claimed Atlantis have become the poster child for contemporary climate anxiety, as coastal cities around the world grapple with the reality that the ocean is gradually reclaiming land that humans have called home for generations. Miami's frequent flooding, Venice's acqua alta, and the Marshall Islands' existential threat from sea level rise all echo the Atlantean narrative of advanced civilizations being swallowed by waters they once controlled. The difference is that instead of divine punishment for moral corruption, we're facing the consequences of carbon emissions and thermal expansion, though the end result looks remarkably similar from the perspective of anyone whose basement is filling with seawater. The psychological appeal of the Atlantis climate change connection lies partly in its suggestion that environmental catastrophe isn't unprecedented, that civilizations have faced and survived, or not survived, similar challenges before. This provides both comfort and terror in roughly equal measures. Comfort in knowing that environmental crisis isn't unique to our era, and terror in recognizing that previous civilizations didn't necessarily handle it well. It's like finding out that your family has a history of a particular medical condition. Useful information, but not necessarily the kind that helps you sleep better at night. Historians still argue whether ancient flood myths, including the Atlantis story, preserve actual memories of post-glacial flooding events that occurred as the last ice age ended around 11,000 years ago. The rapid melting of continental ice sheets caused sea levels to rise by hundreds of feet, submerging vast areas of coastal plains where early human settlements might have flourished. The Black Sea deluge hypothesis suggests that the Mediterranean broke through the Bosphorus around 50 and 600 BCE, rapidly flooding what had been a freshwater lake and forcing mass migrations that might have inspired flood stories throughout the region. The tipping point concept in climate science mirrors the sudden destruction of Atlantis, where gradual environmental changes accumulate until they trigger rapid, irreversible collapse. Modern researchers studying ice sheet dynamics, ocean circulation patterns, and ecosystem stability have identified numerous potential tipping points where relatively small changes could trigger massive cascading effects. The collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet, the shutdown of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, or the release of methane from thawing permafrost could all produce changes as dramatic as anything described in ancient flood myths, except with better scientific documentation and more precise timing predictions. The technological hubris theme in Atlantis stories resonates powerfully with contemporary debates about geoengineering and our ability to technologically manage climate change. Just as the Atlanteans supposedly possessed advanced technology that ultimately contributed to their downfall, modern civilization has developed capabilities that are simultaneously our greatest achievement and our greatest threat. Nuclear power, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and industrial agriculture all represent double-edged technologies that could either save us or destroy us, depending on how wisely we use them. It's like having superpowers that come with an instruction manual written in a language you don't quite understand yet. The social inequality aspects of climate change also echo Atlantean themes about civilizations becoming corrupt and losing their moral compass. Climate impacts disproportionately affect the poor and vulnerable, while the wealthy can often insulate themselves from environmental consequences through technology, mobility, and resources. This creates a dynamic where those most responsible for environmental problems are least likely to suffer their immediate consequences, leading to the kind of moral disconnect that Plato identified as a precursor to civilizational collapse. It's like having a party where some people get to enjoy all the benefits while others have to clean up the mess, except the mess involves rising sea levels and extreme weather events. The lost golden age psychology of Atlantis beliefs intersects with environmental nostalgia, the tendency to imagine that humans once lived in perfect harmony with nature before industrialization corrupted our relationship with the natural world. This romanticized view of pre-industrial life often overlooks the environmental challenges and limitations that our ancestors faced, but it serves an important psychological function by providing a vision of what sustainable civilization might look like. Whether or not Atlanteans actually achieved environmental harmony, the story suggests that such harmony is at least theoretically possible, which can be motivating for contemporary environmental movements. The cyclical nature of civilizational rise and fall in Atlantis narratives offers both hope and a warning for our current climate predicament. On one hand, it suggests that even if our current civilization fails to address environmental challenges adequately, human knowledge and culture can survive and eventually rebuild. On the other hand, it implies that collapse might be inevitable, regardless of our efforts, part of a natural cycle that no amount of technology or wisdom can permanently prevent. It's like being told that your house might burn down, but don't worry, because you can always build another one, which is technically reassuring, but not particularly comforting when you're still living in the first house. The global nature of climate change mirrors the planetary scope of Atlantean destruction, suggesting that environmental problems have outgrown the ability of individual nations or regions to solve independently, just as Atlantis supposedly affected the entire ancient world through its trade networks and military power. Climate change requires unprecedented international cooperation and coordination to address effectively. The challenge is that while Atlantis could theoretically be solved by divine intervention, climate change requires very human solutions involving politics, economics, and social change on a global scale. The urgency embedded in climate science echoes the sudden destruction of Atlantis, where gradual moral and environmental decay culminated in rapid, catastrophic collapse. Climate researchers increasingly emphasize that we have a limited window of opportunity to prevent the worst outcomes, creating a sense of temporal pressure that mirrors the single day and night time frame of Atlantean destruction. Whether we're facing decades or centuries of gradual change punctuated by sudden tipping points, the message remains clear. The time for action is now, before the window of opportunity closes as definitively as the waters closed over Plato's lost civilization. You're now tracing the cultural DNA of Atlantis as it spreads through human civilization like the world's most persistent meme, influencing everything from Renaissance art to modern video games, with the tenacity of a story that refuses to stay buried beneath the waves. Over the past 1,400 years, Plato's philosophical thought experiment has evolved into a cultural phenomenon that touches virtually every aspect of human creative expression, proving that sometimes the most powerful ideas are the ones that never actually existed in the first place. It's like watching a single seed grow into an entire forest of imagination, except the seed was fictional and the forest spans continents and centuries. The Renaissance marked Atlantis's first major cultural comeback as European scholars rediscovered Plato's works and began incorporating Atlantean themes into their art, literature, and philosophical treatises. Artists like Athanasius Kircher created elaborate maps showing Atlantis's supposed location, while writers used the lost civilization as a metaphor for the classical knowledge that had been lost during the medieval period and was being rediscovered through humanist scholarship. It was like having an ancient story serve as both historical curiosity and contemporary inspiration, proving that good myths never really die. They just wait for the right cultural moment to resurface. The age of exploration gave Atlantis new life as European explorers encountered previously unknown civilizations in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Many early colonial accounts describe indigenous societies in terms that echo Plato's Atlantis, with advanced architecture, sophisticated agriculture, and complex social organization that seem to confirm that great civilizations could indeed rise and fall without leaving obvious traces. Spanish conquistadors encountering the Aztec and Inca empires must have felt like they were discovering living versions of Atlantis, complete with golden cities and mysterious technologies that challenged European assumptions about cultural superiority. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries embraced Atlantis as the ultimate symbol of sublime mystery and lost beauty, inspiring poets, painters, and composers to create works that captured the melancholy grandeur of vanished civilizations. Artists like John Martin painted apocalyptic scenes of Atlantis's destruction with the kind of dramatic intensity that made natural disasters look like performance art, while writers like Lord Byron used Atlantean imagery to explore themes of hubris, mortality, and the inevitable decay of human achievements. It was like having an entire artistic movement dedicated to making ancient philosophy look cinematically spectacular. The 20th century saw Atlantis explode into popular culture with the enthusiasm of a civilization that had just discovered mass media and decided to use it to mythologize everything in sight. Pulp magazines, comic books, and early science fiction films transformed Atlantis from philosophical allegory into adventure story, complete with ray guns, underwater cities, and heroes who could breathe underwater without any apparent need for scuba gear. Writers like Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard created their own versions of Atlantean civilizations, proving that when it comes to lost continents, more is definitely more. The influence of Atlantis on modern fantasy literature cannot be overstated, serving as the template for countless fictional civilizations that rise, achieve greatness, and then vanish in spectacular fashion. From Tolkien's Numenor to Robert Jordan's Age of Legends, fantasy authors have repeatedly returned to the Atlantean pattern of advanced civilization, destroyed by its own hubris. Historians still argue whether this represents a lack of imagination or recognition of a fundamental truth about the cyclical nature of human societies. But there's no denying that Atlantis has become the gold standard for fictional civilizations that need to be both impressive and conveniently absent from current events. The New Age movement's adoption of Atlantis has created an entire industry of books, workshops, and spiritual practices based on supposedly ancient Atlantean wisdom, proving that even fictional civilizations can generate very real economic activity. You can learn Atlantean healing techniques, purchase crystals programmed with Atlantean energy, and even undergo past life regression to recover memories of your previous incarnations as an Atlantean priest or priestess. It's like having a spiritual tradition based entirely on a philosophical thought experiment, which is either deeply meaningful or completely absurd, depending on your perspective on the relationship between truth and usefulness. The video game industry has embraced Atlantis with the enthusiasm of developers who realize that underwater cities provide excellent opportunities for both beautiful graphics and challenging level design. Games ranging from Tomb Raider to Assassin's Creed have featured Atlantean civilizations, allowing players to explore virtual versions of the lost city while solving puzzles, fighting monsters, and collecting ancient artifacts. The interactive nature of gaming has allowed people to experience Atlantis in ways that previous generations could only imagine, though whether virtual exploration of fictional places counts as genuine cultural engagement is a question that philosophers are still debating. The documentary and pseudo-documentary tradition has given Atlantis a veneer of scientific respectability, with countless television programs presenting investigations into the lost civilization that blend legitimate archaeology with speculation, computer graphics, and dramatic narration. These programs often feature real scientists discussing actual underwater discoveries, then seamlessly transition to discussing how these findings might relate to Atlantis, creating a kind of intellectual bait and switch that leaves viewers uncertain about what's established fact and what's creative interpretation. The internet age has democratized Atlantis research, allowing anyone with a computer and an imagination to contribute to the ongoing cultural conversation about the lost civilization. Online forums, YouTube videos, and social media groups have created global communities of Atlantis enthusiasts who share theories, debate evidence, and collectively build ever more elaborate versions of what the lost civilization might have been like. It's like having a collaborative fiction project involving millions of participants, except many of the participants believe they're working on a historical documentary rather than a creative writing exercise. The merchandising empire built around Atlantis demonstrates how thoroughly the lost civilization has penetrated commercial culture, with everything from jewelry to home decor items featuring Atlantean themes and symbols. You can buy Atlantean-inspired clothing, decorative objects that supposedly channel ancient energies, and even architectural elements designed to bring the aesthetic of the lost civilization into modern homes. It's like having an entire design movement based on a place that never existed, which says something profound about the power of imagination to influence material culture. The academic study of Atlantis as a cultural phenomenon has become a legitimate field of research in its own right, with scholars examining how the story has been interpreted and reinterpreted across different historical periods and cultural contexts. These studies reveal how each generation projects its own concerns and aspirations onto the Atlantis myth, using the lost civilization as a mirror to reflect contemporary anxieties about technology, environment, spirituality, and social organization. It's like having a story that serves as a Rorschach test for entire civilizations, revealing more about the interpreters than about any ancient reality. You're now standing at the edge of the eternal mystery, where the search for Atlantis transforms from a quest for answers into an appreciation for the questions themselves. And you begin to understand that some stories are more powerful when they remain unsolved than they would ever be if definitively proven or debunked. After following this trail through philosophy, archaeology, psychology, and popular culture, you've arrived at perhaps the most profound realization of all, that the value of Atlantis lies not in its historical reality, but in its capacity to inspire wonder, caution, and reflection about the nature of human civilization itself. It's like finally understanding that the real treasure was never the destination, but the journey that taught you to see the world with more curious and questioning eyes. The enduring appeal of Atlantis speaks to something fundamental about human nature, our need for mystery in an age of increasing scientific certainty, our desire for meaning in a universe that often appears random, and our hope that somewhere, somehow, humans once achieved the kind of harmony and wisdom that seems so elusive in our current world. Whether Plato intended his story as pure fiction, historical allegory, or philosophical parable, he created something that transcends its original purpose and speaks to universal human experiences across cultures and centuries. It's like composing a song that becomes more beautiful each time it's performed by different musicians, with each interpretation revealing new layers of meaning. The scientific search for Atlantis, while it may never find Plato's specific lost civilization, has contributed enormously to our understanding of real ancient civilizations, underwater archaeology, and the dramatic changes that Earth's climate and geography have undergone throughout human history. The technologies developed to search for mythical lost continents have revealed genuine sunken cities, prehistoric settlements, and evidence of catastrophic events that shaped the course of human development. Historians still argue whether this represents a successful failure or a failed success, but there's no denying that the search for something fictional has led to the discovery of many things that are fascinatingly real. The psychological functions served by Atlantis beliefs, the need for meaning, the comfort of hidden knowledge, the appeal of golden ages, and the hope for human potential remain as relevant today as they were in Plato's time. In an era of rapid technological change, environmental uncertainty, and social upheaval, the story of a civilization that achieved greatness and then lost it serves as both warning and inspiration. It reminds us that human achievements are fragile and temporary, but also that humans are capable of creating something worth mourning when it's gone. The cultural impact of Atlantis demonstrates the power of stories to shape human imagination and behavior across millennia, influencing art, literature, science, and even political movements in ways that purely factual accounts rarely achieve. The myth has served as inspiration for environmental movements, technological innovation, spiritual practices, and creative expression, proving that fictional narratives can have very real effects on how humans understand themselves and their place in the world. It's like having an imaginary friend who somehow manages to influence actual events, which is either a testament to the power of imagination or evidence that the line between fiction and reality is more porous than we usually assume. The democratization of Atlantis research through internet technology has created a global community of amateur investigators, each contributing their own piece to an ever-expanding mosaic of theories, interpretations, and creative elaborations. While this has led to an explosion of pseudoscientific claims and conspiracy theories, it has also demonstrated the human hunger for mystery and discovery that drives both legitimate scientific inquiry and imaginative speculation. The challenge is learning to appreciate the journey of investigation without becoming too attached to any particular destination. The environmental parallels between Atlantis and contemporary climate change have given the ancient story new relevance as a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing short-term gains over long-term sustainability. Whether or not Plato intended his story as an environmental warning, it has become one, serving as a mythological framework for understanding how civilizations can destroy themselves through their own success. The fact that a 2,400-year-old philosophical allegory can speak so directly to 21st century environmental concerns suggests that some human challenges are truly timeless. The ongoing evolution of Atlantis interpretations, from philosophical allegory to adventure story to spiritual teaching to environmental parable, demonstrates how living myths adapt to serve the needs of each generation while maintaining their essential appeal. Like a river that changes course while continuing to flow toward the sea, the Atlantis story has meandered through different cultural landscapes while preserving its core themes of rise, achievement, corruption, and fall. Each new interpretation adds another layer to the accumulated meaning, creating a kind of cultural sediment that preserves the concerns and aspirations of successive civilizations. Perhaps the most important lesson from the Atlantis phenomenon is that the search for truth and meaning doesn't always require finding definitive answers. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from the process of searching itself. The skills developed, the knowledge gained, the connections made, and the perspectives broadened through the journey of investigation. The quest for Atlantis has taught us about ancient history, modern psychology, underwater archaeology, and the power of storytelling, regardless of whether the lost civilization ever existed. The question of whether Atlantis was real may ultimately be less important than the question of why we need it to be real. and what that need reveals about our hopes, fears, and aspirations as a species. In a universe where most questions have scientific answers and most mysteries have rational explanations, Atlantis provides a space for wonder, speculation, and the kind of open-ended inquiry that feeds the human soul. It's like having a permanent question mark in the landscape of human knowledge, reminding us that there are still things we don't know and might never know for certain. As you drift toward sleep, let the image of Atlantis fade into the gentle rhythm of waves against an unknown shore, where crystal clear waters reflect starlight and the whisper of ancient wisdom mingles with the eternal sound of the sea. Whether the lost civilization exists in the depths of the ocean or only in the depths of human imagination matters less than the journey it has taken you on tonight. Through philosophy and science, through wonder and skepticism, through the endless human quest to understand our place in the vast mystery of existence. The search for Atlantis continues not because we expect to find it, but because the searching itself keeps alive something essential about what it means to be human, curious, hopeful, and forever drawn to the horizon where the known world meets the infinite possibilities of the unknown. Sleep well, knowing that some mysteries are more beautiful unsolved, and that tomorrow will bring new questions as fascinating as any answer we might discover. The waves that claimed Atlantis continue their eternal dance, carrying stories and dreams toward shores we have yet to imagine. In a world where wonder never truly dies, it only waits patiently beneath the surface, ready to resurface whenever we need to remember that magic and mystery are never more than a single question away.